It's rare when I can say I was there for the launch of one of the biggest indie releases. Well, not exactly part of the company, but you know what I mean. And as the years went on, I would hear about some of the updates this game received, only to be blown away by what they've done. Game is ported to a new platform with platform-exclusive content? Cool. Game gets an amiibo? Cool. Game gets multiple expansions around the many characters in this game, causing the original to be rebranded? Cool. Owners of the original being grandfathered in and don't have to pay more for said expansions? Holy sh**. I got a lot out of the $15 I spent after returning some crappy Batman game. Shortly after buying and beating this game on my 3DS, I guess I was inspired to immediately write a review on it on a now defunct channel. At the time, I didn't cram my videos full of details, but my enthusiasm was greatly forced for the camera. Don't ask me to release the video, it's not happening. So why bring it up? The title of the video probably gave it away, but it's been 10 years since Shovel Knight was released, and it's been about 10 years since I released my original video on it. The thought of that just made me feel very old. Well, the video would have been released on the exact day, but the video's length should probably tell you why that wasn't possible. Since its release in 2014, the game has gone through numerous changes, including the previously mentioned expansions that led to the original being called Shovel of Hope, and the collection is now known as Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. While it would have been great to go over everything the Treasure Trove has to offer, I just want to go over this game specifically and see if it's as good as I remembered. We're taking a look at Shovel Knight, Shovel of Hope, 10 years later. While I did hear about the game through news outlets and other YouTube channels, I didn't really hear too much about the development, but it is an interesting one to note. In an interview with Game Informer, Nick Wozniak of Yacht Club Games said that the game started as a bit of a joke that got a little too serious when they were discussing it. Other developers include those who have worked in the industry, especially with the retro rebooting developer WayForward. The game would not only have the look and feel of a retro title, they have also brought Jake Kaufman to bring in a retro sound to it. His work speaks for itself, with titles like DuckTales Remastered, Shantae, and Double Dragon Neon. Eventually, the studio would launch their Kickstarter where numerous stretch goals would earn the backers and future consumers extra features. Some were aesthetic like the body swap mode, others would add more to the game like challenge mode, and at some point, one little update mentioned that Mega Man composer Manami Matsume would contribute to the game's soundtrack. Demos of the game would be shown off at events like PAX East, and some YouTubers were given an early look at the game as well. They even built a playable level for the Iron Man Gaming tournament held at 2014's Screw Attack Gaming Convention. In fact, there's a cheat code for it that makes it accessible. Honestly, I wish the original levels from the Kickstarter trailer would be there, but that's just me. I like seeing some of this pre-release stuff, and I'm really curious about the boulders in Pridemore Keep. After one delay, the game was finally released on June 26, 2014 to great success and ensuring that Yacht Club Games will be around for a very long time. According to the studio, they basically had to go broke to make this game possible, as the budget for the title was estimated at $1.4 million, but they were able to penny pinch to an excessive degree and bring down the game's development cost to $300,000. That delay I mentioned earlier was set from the fact that they actually ran out of money. It's a very risky position to be in, spending nearly 3 months working for free to see the project to the very end. From someone who bought the game at launch, thank goodness it exceeded all of their expectations. But why is that? Aside from, clearly they deserve to be paid because holy crap, let's talk about the game. Shovel Knight tells the story of adventurers traveling the world. The two that shine the brightest were Shovel Knight and Shield Knight. Things went well until they encountered the Tower of Fate, but things don't go well. Our titular hero makes it out, but Shield Knight is nowhere to be found. Because of this, Shovel Knight gives up the life as an adventurer, and for some time the Tower of Fate is sealed, but at some point an enchantress and her Order of No Quarters decide to wreak havoc all over the world. And it's not stated specifically when, but sometime afterwards the seal to the Tower of Fate fades, which gives Shovel Knight the inspiration to go on one more adventure, to find Shield Knight. As you go through the world, you come across some very colorful characters, like the woman near the bar who is totally into you, the kid playing with his ring. Oh, sorry. There's also a fella named Croaker who is someone I could get along with. Much better than Toader. Total buzzkill. But the game has more than just silly townsfolk. Throughout your adventure, you'll come across other adventurers with their own motivations to fight our hero. There's Mr. Hat, whose infatuation with Shovel Knight's helmet causes him to go berserk when he is denied the piece of gear. Reese is a misguided adventurer who is seeking vengeance but has labeled Shovel Knight as the villain. Baz is attempting to join the Order of No Quarters, but was denied, so his motivation to attack our hero is in the hopes of taking his title upon his defeat. Next is Phantom Striker, and his is pretty simple. He just wants to see who's the better of the two. Then there's Black Knight. He has more involvement with the story as he says Shovel Knight's quest is a waste of time, and he will stand between Shovel Knight and the Enchantress. In fact, he attempts this once again near the end of the game, where he is seen talking to the Enchantress before she gives him a taste of her power. It's interesting that Black Knight doesn't really join the Order of No Quarters, but stays relatively close. Once he loses to Shovel Knight again, he implies that there could be a way to save Shield Knight. The game does an admirable job of never explicitly saying her name, but after the second encounter, he lets Shovel Knight in on what he knows. He has made attempts to bring her back, but he lacked the courage to confront the Enchantress because she is Shield Knight. The power that's in the Tower of Fate took over her body and turned her into a power-hungry spellcaster. When our hero comes face to face with the Enchantress, the power that controls her is aware that Shovel Knight is not going to kill her. The power loses the first round, which frees Shield Knight, and this is where I need to backtrack a little. Throughout the game, Shovel Knight will have a reoccurring dream where he's trying to catch Shield Knight. And once he has gone through the first round against the Enchantress, he actually does. From here, the duo works together to defeat the true form of the Enchantress, but the tower begins to collapse. Shovel Knight is incapacitated, Black Knight catches up to him to take him somewhere safe, and Shield Knight sticks around to give him the opening to leave. The tower crumbles, the villagers cheer, and Shovel Knight is returned to a very familiar camping area to wrap up the game. And the post-credits has a wounded Shield Knight reuniting with Shovel Knight. It's got a bit more going on with the story than just save the damsel in distress and kill the big evil like so many of the game's inspirations. It's still pretty simple, but the reveal of the Enchantress's identity was pretty cool when I first played the game. These days, I can appreciate that they never explicitly say it's her, and I enjoyed most of the NPCs and supporting cast. It makes the game's world feel more alive. A little over the top, but alive nonetheless. For a simple platformer, it's pretty good and doesn't overstay its welcome. Shovel Knight is a 2D platformer of the likes of Castlevania or Mega Man, where the protagonist goes from level to level, running, attacking enemies, and collecting things until you get to the boss fight at the end. His movement is reminiscent of Mega Man's, where he will come to a complete stop when you stop holding down the direction you're moving in, and same goes for the level of control with the jump. For offense, players can swing their shovel, which does pretty good damage to most enemies. Only larger enemies and bosses will take a bit of time to dispose of. Shovel Knight has access to the downstab as well, a move sort of lifted from Zelda 2. And I say sort of because a conversation can be made that it also comes from the DuckTales games, since you can repeatedly bounce off enemies. Only drawback is that you can't infinitely pogo, which was probably done for balance reasons. It's still one of the best attacks, only coming second to something you can get in the second half of the game. As you go through your adventure, you'll come across many collectibles. The majority will consist of jewels that act as the game's currency. You can find them in chests, piles of dirt, destroying blocks, basically all over the place. You can even get them at checkpoints, but if you're not as skilled with the game, it's unwise to break these checkpoints, as dying will send you even further back. If you're confident with the level, by all means go for it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Speaking of deaths, the game has decided to do away with lives in place of dropping the money players have collected. The more you have, the more you'll drop. They can be recollected if you go right back to the section that you're defeated at. Just make sure not to die on your way there, and also try not to die in areas that could be impossible to reach. The money you collect can be taken to villages to purchase different items, relics, extra health, extra magic, and chalices that can act as containers for potions. The potions can be obtained through levels by fishing for truffles in predetermined locations, or going to the truffle pond, and they can help you in a bind by making you invincible, recover your health and magic, or attracting jewels to the player. I'll be honest, the Ichor of Renewal is my go-to because health and magic recovery will get you further in the game than the others. That, and if you're not prone to death, running out of money isn't going to be an issue for you. One final note about the money is that music notes can be taken to the bard as well, so there's plenty of earning potential. As for invincibility, let's talk about that. While Shovel Knight can use his shovel to great effect, he can also purchase sub-weapons called relics from Chester. He can be found in levels, but also in the village. In the levels, you're only going to be able to pick up one, and it's usually relevant to the area itself, like the Dust Knuckle in Mole Knight stage. The Phase Locket is an example of one that isn't for direct combat, but for protection. It has similar properties to the Ichor of Boldness, which is why I don't use that one. If you're going through an area full of spikes, or you might fall into spikes, this is going to help you out a lot, or if you just want to avoid taking damage from a boss. The Fire Wand is a basic fireball that does the same amount of damage as the shovel. The Throwing Anchor helps with hard-to-reach enemies, and the Propeller Dagger is excellent for attacking and keeping your distance from enemies. It also works well as an air dash, which is what I mostly used it for. The War Horn is pretty good because you can just take it and... Aside from that, the other relics are pretty situational, so I only used them once and kind of left them alone. If you feel that's not enough, in the Weapon Outpost, you can purchase new armor and shovel upgrades that tweak the player experience. The armor upgrade adds new traits for Shovel Knight to use. The gray one allows for Shovel Knight to charge a stronger attack when he pogos at least 2 times. This became my armor of choice because the extra damage is a huge benefit. There are other effects such as dropping less gold when you fall, higher magic at the cost of some defense, maintaining footing while you take damage but losing traction, and just being flashy. As much fun as those are, none can match what the Dynamo Mail brings. There are 2 pieces of armor unaccounted for, but we can come back to that later because it's not part of the main game. I mentioned a charge attack earlier because that's one of Shovel Knight's shovel upgrades. It allows the player to hold the attack button and hit enemies even harder. There's another that digs up all the dirt in one swipe, and a final one sends a shockwave when the player is at full health. It's not super useful if you're prone to taking damage, but when you're at full health, it helps. The levels themselves are really well done with their design. Some incorporate gimmicks as a way to enhance the player experience or act as a hazard. I could go over all the ones I enjoyed, but that would get old really fast. I believe the game strikes a fantastic balance between difficulty and accessibility, teaching players about the game's hazards, then testing them on it. Very Mega Man-esque. Outside of the main levels, players can come across challenge areas in the Mario 3 style world map. These either make use of the player's skill or are based around one of the relics. In the main levels, there are hidden areas that either have a noticeable indicator of their existence or require a bit of guesswork to find. I've gone over what benefits come from exploration, so we don't need to do that again. There's not many complaints that I would have with Shovel of Hope's level design. I guess the wind and flying machine, the flying enemies in the Explodatorium, or the Super Mario World looking segment in the Tower of Fate entrance do catch me at times, but for the most part, it's usually user error. The enemies are another highlight of the game. Some of them are common slimes, but others complement the levels they populate. Specifically, I love these little rats on helicopters. They're supposed to be threatening, but they're just little fellas that I will be using to reach higher places. Another thing I can compliment about the game is that some enemies are going to throw out a projectile, but the player is allowed to deflect them. You got a magician in the way, use the large shovel blade to slap their fireball right back to them. Really, it's just one example that proves how genius the shovel blade is. Yeah, it's not the most difficult stuff to get through, but it ensures that the game's flow isn't interrupted as much. Even with mini-bosses. Each level's gonna have one, and the only thing that could pose a real threat is if the player's getting greedy and gets smacked into a pit. If a mini-boss won't do it, the bosses definitely will. Speaking of bosses, let's talk about them. There shouldn't be as much to discuss when it comes to the bosses because I never really saw them as too difficult. This is one of those things where if you have been collecting the relics and the upgrades, you'll have a significantly easier time than somebody who's going with very little. But the big thing is that it can still be done. Remember when I was complimenting the fact that projectiles can be deflected by the shovel blade? It counts for bosses as well, like Black Knight, Mole Knight, and even the Enchantress. They all have projectile attacks that can be smacked back at them and would do damage. While I have been praising the game and everything, the difficulty of these fights are the only thing I can say is the game's weak point. But that's just from how good Shovel Knight's default moveset is. The downstab is one of the most useful attacks you can utilize, especially if you have the Dynamo Mail. And then you have someone like Tinker Knight, which is a little intimidating at first because it's a 2-round fight, but the pattern's not too difficult to figure out. And if you have the mobile gear, the first phase is a one-shot. And while I've been enjoying the fights with the random adventurers, the Order of No Quarters, or even the Enchantress, there is something that is brought in by one of the inspirations that I'm not exactly a big fan of, and that is the boss rush. In the Tower of Fate, before you go up against the Enchantress, you have to fight the Order of No Quarters once again. I guess there is a story reason behind it since they're all kind of just hanging there, but I find it to be boring since I'll just reuse the same strategy that I used originally to defeat them. And because these bosses are easy and I can heal after every single fight, I feel like I just had my time wasted. It's not a victory lap or anything, it's just padding. Okay, so that is my other complaint with the game. The shocking part is that you don't even need to do this. The game's pretty lengthy enough as it is. It's actually a relatively good length. The Enchantress fight is pretty decent. Your positioning is everything in these fights because both phases are able to send you into the abyss. They also require you to wait for an opening, whether it's her going above the ground or waiting for Shield Knight in phase 2. I wouldn't say they're fitting for a final boss, but again, the balance is the reason for that. I still find them fun to fight, but only once. The levels are definitely more interesting than the bosses in the game. Throughout the video, one thing was noticeable in that this is a gorgeous game. The levels, the enemy animations, the use of colors, the whole thing is just eye candy and I'm all for it. I still love some of the areas like Pridemore Keep, Flying Machine, and let's be honest, any level that has a sunset or purple in the background. It's just good on the eyes. I mentioned Shovel Knight as a 2D game, but that's actually not true. Sure, you show this to anyone and they won't be able to tell, but this game is actually in 3D. It's just masked as a 2D platformer in the game's engine. In an episode of Boundary Break that is 100% worth watching, one of the devs mentioned that building the game in a 3D engine was easier to work on for many reasons, one of them being debugging. The 3D engine also allows for the 3DS's stereoscopic 3D effect. I can't really show the whole effect in action, but the background moving in this part is just me messing with the 3D slider. For players who are sensitive to flashing colors on a screen, the game has options to disable that, and it also has options to make the screen shake less intense. Trust me, I'm not judging or anything. The moment I saw this, I turned that sucker off because I find excessive screen shaking to be obnoxious. One more thing to point out, and it's about the Tower of Fate entrance. If you're seeing the gameplay on screen, you'll notice that the rain is animating very slow. This seems to be a bug with the PC version. What you're seeing now is the 3DS version and the rain with its intended effect. I don't know the fix for it, but it was something I've been told about anytime I've streamed this game. Great visuals and gameplay should be accompanied by a fantastic soundtrack, and Jake Kaufman absolutely nailed it. After a bit of digging around, it turns out the music was composed using Famitrackers, a tool used for composing chiptune music with the limitations of the NES implemented. In fact, the game uses the restriction of the VRC6 chip, which is something that's only used in 3 Famicom games, one of them being the Japanese version of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. So what does the VRC6 chip do? Well, it opens 3 more sound channels for much more flexibility with the music. Slight tangent, but did you know there were so many Famicom and Famicom Disk System games that had these enhancements? If you want to know more about them, check out this video by GameSack. If you grew up with the NES like I did and you love NES music, I feel like you were robbed. Don't worry, I feel the same way. With the slight technical stuff out of the way, how's the soundtrack? I was obsessed with the soundtrack when it released. I was probably listening to the entire thing for a long time because it's just that damn good. There was a point where I had to go and listen to Flying Machine or Clockwork Tower on repeat, or find an extended version because they were that good. For the Mega Man fans watching, I mentioned earlier that Manami Matsume contributed to the soundtrack. Well, she did for areas like the Iron Whale and the Explodatorium, so if you want to listen to them, here you go. Something I can appreciate with the sound in this game is that in the village and the weapon outpost, the theme will change depending on which section of those areas you're in. Doing this for every level would probably get old, but it is really cool to see it done in these 2 locations. I also love how the boss fights for each Order of No Quarters has a theme that's a remix of the level that you just went through. I even love the remixed Battletoads music, which is something I have to mention. Depending on the platform, Shovel Knight has more content to go through. I only have the PC and 3DS versions of the game, so I'll be speaking about those and mentioning anything else that I can. On 3DS, you're given the Street Pass Arena. Basically, you Street Pass with another 3DS, and you can battle their character to determine a winner. On PlayStation, Shovel Knight will mistake God of War's Kratos for Black Knight, since he meets him as a silhouette, and will unlock an exclusive armor after defeating him. The PC and Xbox versions will allow players to encounter the Battletoads, Rash, Pimple, and Zitz. They found themselves making an unintentional detour to Shovel Knight's planet, I guess. They mistake the Enchantress for the Dark Queen, and they pretty much stay in the late 80s, early 90s character they originated from. It's fantastic. If you seek them out, you'll be given the opportunity to train with them, in a gauntlet that consists of levels reminiscent of the NES Battletoads. Yeah, that's what I need, a reminder of a level that I couldn't beat in Battletoads. Thanks, game. Which is what I would be saying, but while I was recording footage for this video, I did this. Yeah, when I needed to show off that I couldn't do it, I do it. Well, I hit one of the walls, but still, I did it. Once you defeat Rash, Pimple, and Zitz, you will get the Toad Gear. This will give you access to the combat style of Battletoads, and you'll be able to run by double tapping whatever direction you want to go in. It's cool on paper, but I wouldn't use it to make slight adjustments. It just didn't work out for me. Other contents include these challenges that get progressively harder as you go on. I didn't really get to play much of it, but it's something I could really sink my teeth into. It's a lot of platforming and combat challenges. It's something that's right up my alley. There's some other stuff that's exclusive to the Wii U and Switch version of the game, but I didn't want to buy a Shovel Knight amiibo in 2024. As cool as the amiibos are, it's not worth it. And that's Shovel Knight Shovel of Hope. Thank goodness this game became the success that it is, because it is still one of the finest indie titles that I have ever played, and it's one of the finest platformers I've ever played. The gameplay feels just right, the relics are excellent, and the characters are wacky, but not too over the top. The visuals are breathtaking, and the music is god tier. My only complaint is the bosses and the boss rush itself, but aside from that, it's near perfect. As time went on, this game that sold for $15 originally became jam-packed with so much that it was an easy recommendation. It's been 10 years and the price has been adjusted to add those other stories, but I would still highly recommend picking up Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. I think it's hilarious that Yacht Club Games will be remaking the game for the 10-year anniversary, and adding even more to the title. I'm positive that console exclusives will not make it to the remake, but I think the new additions should compensate for it just fine. If anything, I'm shocked that stereoscopic 3D adjustment is making it in so we can all play around with the background for a bit. 10 years later, and this game is still amazing, and it's definitely a gem. Unfortunately, the 3DS and Wii U versions are no longer available since those stores have shut down. You can only really pick it up on modern consoles. And yeah, this one game turned into an entire franchise. In fact, there's many expansions in the treasure trove, so who knows, I might hit up one of those in the future. We'll see. And I think that's about it. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. I know I missed the 10th anniversary of the original video I released, but it is something I've been wanting to do, so I decided to make the video anyway, and make it as long as I wanted it to be. What do you think about Shovel Knight, Shovel of Hope? Let me know in the comments, or you could just comment on the video, or whatever you want. It's up to you. If you liked the video, feel free to like the video and sub if you're new. At this time, I want to thank the supporters of this channel. They are the channel members and patrons who are supporting with a monthly contribution. The $1 Vienna tier members have their names scrolling across the screen, but the $5 Jumbo supporters get a verbal shoutout. They are Martin YT Plays on YouTube and Jimmy Duke STR on Patreon. Thank you all for your extra support, it really means a lot, and if you want to join and realize that I gave new names to channel member tiers, you can do so with the join button below this video. The Patreon linked below at patreon.com/GottaBeFrank, and subbing on Twitch does the same thing too. You get the same benefits on all platforms. What are those benefits? Well, you get exclusive updates and content when possible. The lowest tier is $1 on everything except for Twitch. That one's not my call. I can't do anything about it. And I have social media accounts that are linked in the description as well, so you can follow me there if you choose to. Oh, and by the way, come to the streams. I stream on YouTube, on Twitch, and I stream on this channel specifically. Again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful and safe day, and until next time, take care, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.